Hello everybody, it's Nick here with Nick Tolman Music, and today we're going to go ahead and continue our beginner guitar lesson series using Mel Bay's Modern Guitar Method, Grade 1. Okay, so today's lesson will be on page 33, and page 33 has a couple new concepts that it's going to introduce, and also a couple new songs. One is just a solo and the other one is a duet. We're going to go ahead and talk through all of this stuff today. So first thing that you're going to see on the top of the page is a little lesson on first and second endings. And this is a continuation of the concept of a repeat, which we talked about early on in the lessons. And if you haven't seen my lesson that talked about repeats, I'll put the link up above here. But essentially, a first and second ending is just a slightly more complicated repeat, and here's how it works. So as you can see on the example here, you have some music that you're playing along, and then you have a repeat sign. But right before you hit that repeat sign, that measure right before is in a bracket that has a number 1 on it. And that is what we call a first ending. And what that means is that is the music that you are going to play the first time that you play through before you repeat. Okay, so you're playing through the first time, you're going to play that music that is inside of the first ending, or the bracket with the 1 on it. And then you're going to repeat back to wherever you would repeat to. So it might be back to the beginning, or it might be back to a forward repeat sign if you have one of those. And then you're going to come back. You're playing through the second time, and then the second time, instead of playing that measure that is labeled 1, or the first ending, you're going to skip over and play the second ending. It's as simple as that. Essentially, the first time you play, you're going to play the first ending, and the second time, you're going to play the second ending, and not the first ending. Now this can happen anywhere in the music. It might be at the end of a song, but it might be in the middle of a song too. In the case that it's in the middle of the song, after you play that second ending, you're just going to continue on with whatever music happens after the second ending. If it's at the end of the song, you'll just play that second ending and then end. It's a pretty simple concept, but we are going to see this inside of the songs that we play on this page. So it's something that we just kind of need to be somewhat familiar with. Alright, so let's take a look at the Cradle Song. And right out of the gate, I'm just going to play the song for you, and then we're going to talk about some of the things that you might need to work on or be aware of when you play this. Okay? So I'm going to go ahead and put the metronome at 72, and we'll go from there. 1, 2, 3, 1, and 2. Alright, so there is the Cradle Song. I mean, really, to be right honest with this one, this is a pretty challenging exercise, I feel like, for this point in the book. It reminds me of kind of a few exercises back when we worked on Shenandoah and Bluebells of Scotland. It just has some awkward things that take place. and really requires some practice, okay? So let's look at some of these things. First off, I think the biggest thing that you're going to need to do to be successful with this one is to be able to identify what chord shapes are really controlling each measure. And it actually gives you some chords above to kind of help you with that. And so what I kind of want to do is I'm just going to walk you through kind of from start to finish and talk through some of that, okay? So right out of the gate, we're dealing with a C chord, and these first couple measures are not too challenging. The thing that you're dealing with in the first couple measures are the situation where you're attacking different parts of the C chord, okay? So we start with that, with the E note there. But right already, I know that I'm going into the C chord shape, so I'm just starting with my C chord already set up. Now, that's what I'm talking about. So we strum the lower 3 notes of the C chord, and then the upper 3 notes of the C chord. Now, this can actually be done in almost a single movement. It's like a strum, stop, right? 1, 2. And you'll notice with my right hand, I'm just strumming, stopping, doing a rest stroke. Doing a rest stroke where my pick is resting there on the B string, and then hit the upper 2 strings. Now, I think some time practicing that would really be beneficial to do. It's really developing control over different parts of the guitar where you're strumming on the chord. Now, that can also be done as 2 separate, like, kind of 2 separate strums. Either way is fine. Whatever way you choose is pick a way and just practice that, and make sure you're being accurate and hitting the right notes. It's kind of easy on this exercise to get lazy with that and just, right? I'm just kind of being haphazard with where I'm strumming, which is okay. The idea here, though, is that you're developing some more finer ability to target certain strings. Right? So spend some time on that. So that's kind of the first 2 measures. Then we dive into that measure 3 where we have... Now for me, I know it does say E minor, yeah, because we go from a C to an E minor, and it absolutely is. I mean, the 3 notes that you're strumming, E, G, B, that's an E minor chord. But don't take that as a need to like adjust to an E minor, standard E minor fingering. All I'm doing there is I'm just taking my first finger off of the C chord and hitting those 3 notes. That's all you need to do. Okay, so C, you're strumming the E, G, and C, and then you take your first finger off, and that's an E minor chord. E, G, B. And then for that A minor, well, all I'm going to do is I'm going to take that 3rd finger and I'm going to tuck it up here on the A. So I am going to move 1 finger. So that whole measure would look like this. Okay, I'll do that up close so you can see. So we have this. So moving into the 4th measure, from that A minor that we just ended on, there is going to be a slight adjustment, okay? So my 2nd finger is essentially going to go where my 3rd finger is, okay? Boom. 2nd finger on A, and then my 3rd finger is going to go down to this F. Now my 3rd finger is going to hang out on that mid-range F, the F on the 4th string, for a good portion of this song, for several different parts. But that's what's happening. So we have this F and A, right? And then when it goes to that what's labeled as a G7, all we're doing is just taking that 2nd finger off. Now, for me, for there, I I go to that D with my pinky, with my fourth finger, because my third finger is already down here on the F. So I don't necessarily want to make a big jump. To me, that's awkward. My fourth finger is right there. I can do that. It's much smoother to me. Okay, so the fourth measure is going to look a little bit like this. Okay, I'll do it once up close for you. Now moving into the fifth measure, that first chord stack is pretty simple, right? We just have a G, a B, and an F. Just using one finger, nothing fancy. It's kind of outlining a G7 chord still. And then that second chord stack is still outlining a G7, but we're putting the F in a different place, right? We're going to do the F down with our third finger on the fourth string. And then we have a G and a D. Right, so. And again, I'm just going to leave my fourth finger on that D into the fifth measure there, so. Up close. Right. It's all that's happening there in the left hand. So then in the fifth measure, we're holding out that half note that we just landed on, and then we have a couple notes, nothing fancy. And then we move into the sixth measure, right? So we just played that F with our third finger. We're going to leave it there. Just leave that F there and then play the rest of the notes down. And then it'll just kind of play itself as long as you do that. Just leave the F down that whole time. And then we've got our C chord. Nice. Then we go to F. This is the first measure of the second line. All it is an F chord, but we're not playing that top F of our standard fingering. So you don't have to, actually, you don't even have to worry about barring your first finger like you normally would. If that's a habit and you just like want to just play the standard full F, that's fine. Just do it. But you don't have to, okay? But it is just an F chord. You're just going to strum F, A, C. That A and the F, those eighth notes, are in the chord, so you don't have to move anything with your left hand. And then we move to a C chord and do the same exact thing. Right, now our third finger is going to go back up to this F note, outlining this kind of G7 measure. And this is similar, so this is the third measure of the second line, and it's very similar to the 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7th measure of the first line, where you just kind of leave that third finger on F and play the rest of the notes with it. Okay, nothing too fancy. Now we're moving into the fourth measure of the second line. We have, again, a C chord. So that one, it's funny. It's just a C chord. You're just strumming the bottom two notes of the chord, and then the next two notes of the chord, and then just the two C notes, the eighth notes. It's labeled a C7 above it, and I suppose that like that measure really isn't outlining a C7 because you would have to have a B flat in there. But a C7 does work right there, so if you ever were just like strumming chords along with this, you could play a C7. I know we haven't learned that chord yet, but that's alright. So don't stress too much about that C7. Just play a C chord. Okay, and then the next measure, so this is the 5th measure of the 2nd line, back to F and C. Now, the second to last measure here of this 2nd line is labeled G7 for the measure, which is right. We're going to start off with our first finger on F. Now, for the next little chord stack, our 3rd finger is going to go down onto this mid-range F, and our 1st finger is going to come off, and then our pinky is going to drop to play that D, and then we end on C. That's the first ending, and then it repeats. Okay, obviously the second time through, take the 2nd ending instead of the 1st ending. Let me just play those last 2 measures. So the measure before the 1st ending and the 1st ending up close so you can kind of see it. So again, 1st finger on F, then our 3rd finger is going to go down to F here, and then our pinky is going to drop onto D. And there it is. So I did a few more up close shots on this one. I really kind of just wanted to show you some of the finger movement that's taking place in this one. 72 is a perfectly fine tempo to play this song. It's about where you would hear the tune. It could go maybe a little faster. You could play it around 80 or so. Obviously, you can practice it as fast as you want. I mean, you could do that if you wanted. But there you go. So that's the Cradle Song. Alright, so let's take a look at this next section. There's a little thing in the middle of the page. It says words indicating variations of tempo. Alright, so a couple lessons ago we talked about words that were identifying a specific tempo, like allegro, andante, moderato, right? These are Italian words used in music to describe the music, okay? Now, these words here on this page are words that are telling you that the tempo is going to do something. It's going to change in some way, right? So the first word that it gives is ritardando, or just retard, and in parentheses, R-I-T. Okay, that's usually how we'll see it written on the music, is just R-I-T dot. And that is just an abbreviation for ritardando. Now, a ritardando means that you are going to slow down, okay? Now, this is very common at the end of a song, or maybe like at the end of a particular section of a song. So if I was going to play, I was just playing the Cradle Song, right? If I was going to play those last, I'll just play the last 4 measures. If I was right in time, bum, 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 2, 3. Okay, so that's right in time. Bum, 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 bum. Now, if I were to do a retard, it might sound something like this. Okay, so all I did is I just kind of dramatically slowed down the last bit of the music there. So whenever you see retard, that's kind of what it's asking you to do. Now, it could be a very slow, dramatic slowdown, or it could just be like a slight slowdown and then it picks back up or whatever. But that's what a retard is. Now, the next word that we're going to look at is basically the opposite of that, which is accelerando. So an accelerando is usually written as just ACC period. And what that means is that you're just going to get faster. Now, for an accelerando, generally, the thing about a retardando is that often you'll see it happen and then it just kind of goes back to the original tempo. It's just like a slight slowdown, dramatic kind of part, and then it continues on the original tempo. I feel like with an accelerando, usually what's happening is the music is just getting faster. So there's like a section where it's building, gets a little faster, and boom, now it's like rocking a little harder and goes. It's not as common to see it do that and then slow right back down like you would kind of see in a ritard. Okay, so that's how that works. All right, we're actually not going to see those in action in the next exercise. That's just kind of for your information. If you ever see that as you're reading music, that's what those two mean. All right, so let's go ahead and take a look here at Billy's Duet. As usual, I'm going to play both parts for you at 2 different tempos so you can see how they go, so you can practice along at 2 different tempos. And also, kind of as my new norm, I'm going to show you what these parts sound like together. So let's go ahead and get started. Here is Billy's Duet, part 1 at 72 on the metronome. 1, 2, 3, 1, ready, play. And there we go. Okay, so there are a couple things in here that you need to be aware of and that are new, that it didn't specifically talk about on the page necessarily, but they are happening. So if we look here at the last 2 measures of the first line, we have that first note, which is F sharp, right? Normally we would play that with our second finger because we're playing in first position, but it's telling us it's got a 1 above it. That's saying play this with your first finger, okay? This is a shift. It's actually telling you to shift into second position for those 2 measures. And it makes a lot of sense to do so, right? Because you have F sharp, G, and then A you would play with your 4th finger. And that's your shift back, right? It says F sharp with your first finger, and then F natural with your first finger, okay? So, starting on the 3rd to last measure of that first line, on that C, this is what that would look like. Right? That shift happens there. It's kind of a sneaky one, right? Because you have that open E, so it's an easy place to just move up, right? And shift back down. That is actually a really good example in this book of just kind of sneakily introducing you to shifting into a new position. So that is happening there. Watch out for that. Everything is pretty straightforward until we get to the second ending situation, okay? So you come down, you're on the last line, you get to the first ending, you play the repeat, you go back, right? There's a forward repeat at the beginning of the third line, so you're just going to repeat back to there. Then you play that line again, you're playing it the second time, and then you play the second ending. Now, that kind of looks like the end, but if you notice down below, at the very bottom of that second ending, it says DC al fine. Now, what that means, there's a little note over to the left on the very bottom of the page. It says DC al fine. Repeat from the beginning to the word fine. Yes, that's what it means. So DC, whenever you see DC in music, what that literally means is da capo. It's another Italian word which means the head, okay? So it's telling you to go back to the head or the top or the beginning. So back to the beginning, and then it says al fine, which means to fine. So then you're going to play until you see the word fine, which happens at the end of the second line. You can see it written right there, fine, which means end or finish, final, okay? That is the end. So that's why when I played through, I said repeat, and we repeated, and I took the second ending and I said da capo, which means back to the beginning, and we played to that fine, and we ended. Okay, so that is a very common repeat situation that you might see, which is called a DC. So let's go ahead and play the second line. Here is the second line at 72 on the metronome. 1, 2, 3, 1, ready and play. There we go. The second line is pretty straightforward. There are a couple of chords that you hit. It doesn't really have them labeled above, so you have to kind of figure out what chords it's outlining, but they're full chord fingerings. You have a G7 chord that happens in the second measure. You have a C chord that happens in the fourth measure. Another G7 in the second measure of the second line. Another C chord in the fourth measure of the second line. And then in the second to last measure of the second line, we have an F chord, right? To a G7 and then a C. Okay, that's really all there is to it on that one. You do have a couple F sharps in the third line that you can watch out for, but there's no shift. You're just going to play those with your fourth finger. Okay? Alright, here's what the two parts sound like together at 72 on the metronome. 1, 2, 3, 1, ready, play. Very good. Let's go ahead and try this at 120 on the metronome. So here is part 1 at 120. 1, 2, 3, 1, ready, and... There we go, nicely done. Let's go ahead and try the second line at 120 on the metronome. 1, 2, 3, 1, ready, and... So here is what the two parts sound like together at 120 on the metronome. 1, 2, 3, 1, ready, and... And there we go. Thank you so much for tuning in today. As always, please subscribe. If you haven't already, please check out www.nicktolmanmusic.com. Also, if you are enjoying this content and would like to support Nick Tolman Music in continuing to see more content, please check out my Patreon page, and we will see you next time. Thanks.